Greetings. This is Nina's class presentation from the Warner Springs Hub and Resource Center in San Diego County, California. This class was done in person and now also recorded for all of our far-flung neighbors so they can see it. So many ways. It's best to just think about the best way for yourself. So it's food intake. For instance, if you eat lots of meat versus lots of veggies, how much mobility or exercise are you hoping to get? And then what kind of backyard do you have? Is it large or small? The next few images were taken from the Rodale Institute book on composting. This is cinder blocks that are not mortared together. This one's got lids, and that helps to keep the critters out. There are board planks that go in and out of these channels, and that makes it a lot easier to scoop from one bin to the next. However, this bin is a little bit more startup work in the beginning. This one has movable top cinder blocks. You can even plant directly into this really new, great soil that you have made. This one is great for multiple piles in large acreage. You can leave them in place for a few months and then it's done. You don't have to haul everything around. Plus, it's pretty inexpensive. It's hardware cloth, which is not chicken wire, but rather, you can see how they're square. They're tack welded together in each of those crossovers. This one aerates quite nicely, and it's also sort of beautiful. This is the New Zealand bin, and it's kind of a cross between a few different ones. It's sturdier, and still easy to manipulate, and it's inexpensive. Windrows are like a lasagna, giant lasagna, can be turned by hand, but this is even better with a tractor. So larger composting companies use this form. You can see this trash can has a number of holes in it. The holes are for aeration and also for letting the water drain out. There's also this special tool that you shove down into the trash can, or really any pile, and rather than having to dig it out, you just pull it, and these little flippers kind of open up and allow the air to go in. So, because we're in California, I had to put this slide in, but you can see that it also has those same slats that go up and down, and you start with fresh stuff, you let it sit for a while, and then you use your shovel or pitchfork and put it into the next bin, and then you can put new, fresh kitchen scraps in the first bin. This one's pretty. It's trendy. It's got some depth to it. It's great for even being outside, kind of in the front yard if you're in an urban area. But the thing to make sure of is that many pallets have got fire-resistant chemicals as well as pesticides in there. So be careful and not put food in there unless you're certain. Bokashi is an interesting method. It is anaerobic. It was developed in Japan. You add a special grain as a starter to ferment things. And in class, and you'll see in a few slides later on, Dorothy Willis will go over some details that she did in our classroom. Why do we do all this? It's because it's fantastic to know exactly what your soil is comprised of, especially if you're growing organic vegetables. To have full control and better taste, especially for us in the country who can't just pop out to the store. So the ability to step outside and have the best is worth the extra work. Vermiculture is similar to regular composting, but not exactly. The worms are helping us out to do the composting. Their poop is the great stuff here. You feed them, and they feed the soil. Brittany just got us this tumbler. We're all very excited. It has 2 bins. You can see this photograph has been photoshopped, but you put the fresh materials on the left, and then you move them to the other side, and it's the tumbling, but not the digging. So that's kind of cool. All right, so 2 weeks is more of a sales line, but if you have kids or grandkids, this one is great because they love to spin it. Now that you've seen something of a range of choices, what are the conditions that you have specifically? Each situation is so different. The slope, meaning do you have a place that's easy to get to, and maybe even more importantly, that a hose can reach? Do you have shade or sun? And how much work is realistic for you? Are your needs large or small? Having bacteria in one's compost pile is really important. Protozoa are important, and fungi. It's interesting because we probably don't ever really think of those as good things, beneficial things, but in the compost pile, they are essential. I call it mycorrhiza. Some people call it mycorrhiza. But this is one of my favorite things to find when I'm on a walk. And it looks like a stick with some white fuzz on it. This image has been magnified. But I pick them up when I'm on a hike, and then I bring them back and I tuck them into my compost bin. A few slides back, we spoke about bacteria and the importance of that. But there's also these physical decomposers that are also very important, and so many of them we think of, again, this kind of negative thing. Mites, millipedes, centipedes, sow bugs, spiders, beetles, and then nematodes. There's good ones and bad ones. Ants, even though you don't want them really near your compost pile as they're crawling up your legs. Flies that we're always thinking are so awful. But then there are the beloved earthworms. Certain bacteria is not good for us to introduce into our food. Now you say, no cat, no dog poop, no bird droppings, but human is sometimes okay. What, human? If you have gotten food from China, they use night soil. Somehow they process it to make it okay. Americans process human poop in large-scale government-controlled systems. There is actually a long list of things that can be composted, and variety is good and interesting for children. I'm back to my Rodale book again. There's manure that is good. So rabbits, chickens, sheep, horses, steer, cattle, ducks, and pigs, even human urine can be collected. It's high in nitrogen. Bat guano is very expensive and prized by gardeners. Oh, and manure is often full of seeds that can be killed by high temperatures of composting. We'll get into that in a minute. Every book says it's important to balance the greens and the browns that you put into your compost. But do I do that? Maybe not so much accidentally, I think mostly. I want you to know the correct way. And even if you don't, like me, I'm not so much in a hurry. It just takes a little bit longer. So here's what I do. This is kind of a lot to read, but I have dug a pit. It's close to the back door. I put all the vegetable scraps in there, manure when I can get it. I use the gopher holes as a method for air ventilation. I throw perforated mesh on top to mostly because of the dog, make sure the dog doesn't get at any of that. Sometimes I use cardboard. Each time I bring some scraps out, I dig a little hole, empty a stainless steel container that's usually on the countertop, and I cover that with the same soil. I put in a little leaf mold, some small branches, no meat, no dairy. I also put in citrus. I have a cardboard divider, and I put the done stuff in there to wait until I need it in the garden. There are worms there. If there's grubs, I squeeze them with my fingers. Some pill bugs are good to have. Mostly I kill what I think is going to be eating the plants in my greenhouse. I add extra water in the summertime, and my bin is under a cottonwood tree, so it has some shade. Ralph's system is a little bit different than mine because he is all about supporting the worms. He keeps a pile of sticks nearby, and then he takes those and puts them in the underside. His bin is made up of a series of rings, if you will, and he is able to move those back and forth, and he uses a pitchfork so he doesn't hurt the worms. He uses no meat, no citrus, and no metal. So for example, those little staples in the tea bags, the worms just don't like those. They stay away. So Ralph doesn't keep them in there. He covers his bin with hardy board, and then under that is a worm blanket of straw that is left over from our archery practice. Worms love straw, and that keeps the pile a little warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. And it also kind of regulates to the right amount of sogginess. They really love it. When we're near the coast, we have two ways of processing the compost. We put the yard clippings in a tumbler until they break down a bit, and then we put them in the outdoor bin with worms. When the compost is done, it shovels directly into these, slightly raised beds. We have a 3-tiered plastic purchased bin that lives in the garage in the winter and the covered patio in the summer. Coffee grounds and eggshells are their favorites. I'll show you those pictures of that in a moment. This is similar to the one that we use. You can see there's a spigot on the bottom, and that's supposed to be for the worm tea, compost tea you might have heard of. And that's used as a fertilizer. You can spray it as a foliar spray, meaning onto the leaves themselves, or you can put it into the soil. Mine has never produced not even a drop. But the rest of it, we both just really love. The worms travel up and down these tiers, and when you put fresh food in one of them, the worms head towards it, and then that is the time that you can harvest that particular level because the worms aren't there. Have we all heard this wives' tale? If you cut a worm in half, you have two. Please don't try that. They multiply hermaphroditically, and they sort of just lay near each other, and they can switch their genders around. They make lots and lots of babies. Many times in Warner Springs, I mention, hey, composting. And there's a lot of rumor about fire now. Some say it happened for sure. Some say maybe not. Maybe it was something a little different. Either way, it's important to pay attention to the heat from your compost pile. So please keep an eye on that and make sure that it doesn't get too hot, especially in the summer when it's really dry here. These are some temperatures to know about. Is it the most important one? That worms die above 90 degrees. So if you want to have worms in your compost, please keep it below 90. 300 degrees is just too hot. Add some water. Hugelkultur is a very interesting process. Ruth Wallen and I did a Hugelkultur project for the city of Escondido. We ended up making a shape that looked like a tree, but the main deal is that you put larger pieces of wood on the bottom after you've dug out this hole, and then smaller pieces, even newspaper on the top, and then you can plant your vegetables, your flowers, pollinators, that kind of thing. Truth is that, Hugelkultur is from Germany, where they have a lot more rain than we do. Now, I have a Hugelkultur project at my house in Warner Springs, and I've got it situated so that the water that drains from my courtyard goes and settles underneath, kind of by the bigger pieces of wood. And that's got some staying power. It stays kind of moist most of the time. I also put ash. So, we burn wood for heat, and I use that ash in this pile. This slide is quite long. It basically says that you need to have both carbon and nitrogen in your pile. I'm going to pause for a moment so you have time to read the technicals. This is a much easier graphic. Many places in the neighborhood have no trash pickup, or individuals make separate contracts for trash pickup. However, there's been some governmental policies that are sort of encouraging larger trash pickup companies to separate the viable compost to the trash, so that not all of it goes to the same place, which would normally be in the trash. So, Stone Ridge, I feel like they didn't really get a lot of information about how to proceed. And actually, it ended up being kind of a negative because people were emotionally unhappy about it. So there was no real smooth transition with it. But basically, no plastic bags, no pet waste, no gravel, no trash, and no hazardous materials are the standard rules. And all of that seems perfectly reasonable for what we know now. So this is a new gadget, the Lomi, which I got at Costco for $300. It is an on-the-counter electrical composter. There are a number of companies that make things like this, but in the image to the left, you can see the sort of things that I had in there, and it goes into this very heavy pot that's got a churning thing on the bottom, some heat and air goes in there. And you see the picture on the right with this bag? So there's certain types of plastic that are recycled in high temperature municipalities. Well, in this particular case, the Lomi has a setting for those particular things. They can be bags, sometimes those straws, and sometimes even cutlery, the disposable, so to speak, cutlery. There's lots of different settings, and so far we have made 2 batches that were both surprisingly dry, and based on the ingredients, they varied in their texture too. It's kind of an energy hog. It's about the same as a refrigerator. There was no smell, and it has 2 charcoal filters. It's a bit warm for summer indoors, but it will be great in the winter. This is best for folks with a very small yard and people who maybe just have potted plants and they have a desire to recycle, be green, and teach that to their children. 2 closing tips for the day. So the image on the left is using a muffin pan to make those divots so that you can put bulbs in there, kind of like garlic. And also the image on the right. You know how when you buy those heads of lettuce that has like a little root ball that, the whole thing is encased in plastic, but the roots keep the lettuce very fresh. Well, once you finish that head of lettuce, plant that root ball and you get a second head of lettuce. It's like having a twofer. This is Dorothy and her son Cody's bokashi setup. They have a homer bucket, the starter grain, and then they put all of that stuff, and I'll talk about that in a second, lid on outside 6 months, and then they put it around their trees, and it's all great. Now, they put in pet poo and meat pieces and dairy. It's a pretty amazing process. This is our maiden voyage into composting for the community. Here we see Ralph. He is describing vermiculture to the adults and then later on in the day to the kids. And the kids were loving the worms. They are future worm ranchers, I'm sure of it. So always with the idea of looking around to see what you have and using that to the best of its advantage. So from the right to the left, the hay goes into the horse, and the next bin to the left is fresh poo. Then it's drier and will crumble. And then the last bin is the one that is ready to put into your composter. Putting it in a composter too early, you will get grass seeds sprouting in your garden, and that is not the best thing. I mean it. Contact me with any questions that you have. There's my email address. And now go out and make a great garden.